Hello, I'm Dawn Thomas, a Managing Director here at CNA's Institute for Public Research, or IPR. CNA's IPR is independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Our work is data-driven, and our results focus on the operational impact that CNA has cultivated for more than 80 years. Today, I will be sharing a step-by-step guide to plan, conduct, and evaluate exercises that will help you prepare for upcoming city, county, and state elections. So some background for you. The complexity of keeping elections safe and secure have increased over time, with state, local, tribal, and territorial election security stakeholders facing COVID-related changes to state and local voting processes, concurrent incident response, so some places are flooding, some have snow in November, dependency on lifeline services such as power and water, political and social divides within our society, and physical and cyber threats and hazards from foreign adversaries. In a public trust poll from the 2020 elections, 41% of those polls believe that U.S. was not very prepared or not prepared at all for security threats to upcoming elections. So what's the impact of all of these complexities? Well, there are additional burdens on SLTT stakeholders to provide jurisdictional elections that are fair, safe, and credible for those coming to and working at voting sites and other election cycle locations. So who are election security stakeholders? Well, it's a pretty wide group and maybe wider than you're used to thinking about. Of course, it includes local election officials and elected officials, but it also includes your communication staff and your public information officers or PIOs, your first responders like your police and your fire and your EMS, and your emergency managers. The facilitator owners, operators, where you hold your elections and other sites that are involved in elections are also stakeholders, as well as those lifeline owners and operators, so like your power companies and your water companies. Also the election site workers, and that includes both the people who are officially working there and also your volunteers. And finally, of course, is the general public. So why exercise election security? Well, there's many, many good reasons. I have a few of them here for you. So first, the diversity of stakeholders. The group that I just mentioned, it's a wide-ranging group, and it makes the coordination and information sharing among them challenging. The range of potential threats has grown, and this puts a high demand on those that need to respond and or deal with consequence management, because the options of what could happen are much wider than they used to be. Depending on the incident, you may be responding in an environment of degraded communications. So this could be true in something like a cybersecurity attack. Also, local or facility continuity of operations plans may not have been recently updated. They might not reflect things such as changes from COVID or from growing communities or from different types or different numbers of voting sites, for example. Another thing to keep in mind is election security is called out as one of the 6 Homeland Security priorities. So for the urban area and state Homeland Security grants, you need to be allocating at least 3% of that funding towards, and election security exercises are a great way to execute that. All right, so I'm going to tell you about designing, conducting, and evaluating an election exercise in 7 easy steps. So this first one, you're going to hear me throughout the rest of the other 6 steps because it's foundational. So first, you're going to decide on your exercise objectives. In the next few slides, you'll see I give you many objectives to choose from when you're thinking about what you want to focus on for your exercise. After that, you're going to determine your participation, determine your exercise type, develop a scenario, plan for conduct and evaluation, conduct the exercise and its evaluation, and then finally integrate your results. So we're going to go through each of these 7 steps. So first, you're going to decide on your exercise objectives. As I said, these are foundational. This is understanding with your stakeholders what it is that you need to exercise, whether it's new plans, whether it's a lack of a plan that you need to workshop, whether it's one very specific aspect of elections. That's going to be going into your thought process when you think of your objectives. So I have a bunch of examples for you. Do not do all of these exercise objectives in one exercise. There are way too many. Depending on how long your exercise is, you can cover anywhere from 1 to maybe 6 objectives in one solid exercise, and we'll talk about the different types of exercises and how many objectives you can cover. But these are some things to think about for your exercise. You can test the capabilities of jurisdictions to share intelligence and information relevant to your election day threats and incident response. Another one is prioritize and support the security and availability of infrastructure systems. So like make sure that your transportation, electric systems, water, communications are intact, and what happens when they're not. You can workshop your emergency response plans to address a wide range of threats and hazards at major jurisdictional polling sites. So pull out those EOPs, emergency operation plans, and exercise them. You can discuss operational coordination for responding to an election site incident. Who forms your incident command? Who forms a unified command if you need one? Discuss and document continuity plans if elections occur concurrent to an incident or an emergency response. So how do you keep elections going if you're also dealing with severe weather or civil unrest or a cyber attack? You can discuss and define the roles of election service providers, such like vendors, in planning for and responding to security issues. This can be real time or as part of the planning process. You can discuss the types of physical and site security measures against which all election sites should plan, or those specific to individual facilities. So you can work with that school and talk about the physical security measures that they're going to take there and how it's going to impact operations. You could formulate how the jurisdiction will deliver coordinated, prompt, and reliable public information to combat real-time contested information. So myth busting is one way to call this. When you see misjudged and malinformation, how will your public information personnel respond is a great objective to have for an exercise. You can verify the expected roles and applicable regulations for jurisdictional public safety entities. So focusing on law enforcement, emergency management, fire, EMS, what can you and can't you do at election sites? You can examine the jurisdiction's ability to ensure and demonstrate data integrity throughout the election cycle, from voter registration databases to accurately recording and counting actual votes. Walking through this process gives people, the public in particular, much more confidence in your elections, and make sure that everybody who is an election stakeholder understands it and can explain it to others. So next is you're going to determine your participation. So I would recommend first you form an exercise planning team. If you're doing a workshop, you want people on your planning team, those people who write plans. A workshop's really designed to help you write a plan. If you're doing a tabletop exercise or a functional exercise or anything that's more boots on the ground, you're going to want those who carry out the plans to be part of your planning team. You also want to heavily involve your primary participants, but also consider those non-traditional stakeholders, like your vendors for your voting machines, for example. If you wanted to exercise some sort of cyber attack and how they are or are not affected by it, it's great to have them sitting at the table. You're also going to consider other private sector participants, facility owners and operators, right? Those who manage and run your schools or your municipal buildings that you're planning to hold elections in or have some other part in the election process. We talked about election system vendors, and then also those lifeline providers, those that provide water and electricity. Transportation providers are those that work with transportation, like your Department of Transportation locally or at the state level. You also want to consider your partner jurisdictions. So those you share systems with or those you share resources with, right? If you have an incident, whose police and fire are going to come to support you? Or if you have a cyber incident, who do you share a system with? Also consider federal participants. So your local person of your federal organizations that support election security. You might want to call your local protective service advisor, for example, or your cyber security advisor from DHS CISA. You might have a local representative from FBI that you work with or from the Secret Service. All of those people that work at those local levels know you, they know your community, and they're great participants in exercises. Okay, number 3. Then we're going to determine our exercise type. So we already have our objectives because that's foundational. We already know who our planning team is going to be. And now we need to decide what kind of exercise we want to do. So there's two kinds of exercises. One is discussion-based and one is operations-based. And there's specific times that you want to do each. So if you're thinking about doing discussion-based, you should run a workshop if you don't have a plan or you have a plan that no one knows to exercise. So a workshop really helps you form a plan or helps you socialize a plan that no one is familiar with. So that's a great option if you're at that stage. If you already have a plan, you can run a tabletop exercise or TTX. So you have related response plans or an annex and a general awareness of that plan. And you also have access to those that respond and make decisions according to that plan. They really need to be sitting on the table for that tabletop exercise to go well. You might want to run an operations-based exercise. So I would say run a functional exercise if functional exercises meet your objectives. You have a well-known plan, and you've already done a TTX and updated your plan accordingly. FX take a little more time and a little more energy. It takes people that might be responding kind of out of the picture for a little while. So you need to make sure that you're doing it on a foundation of we have a plan, we know the plan, now we just want to see if we can execute it sitting at our workstations. If you want to take it one step further, there is a drill or a full-scale exercise. These are important if you need hands-on practice, but you also need to have the time and the funding. These are more labor-intensive and they take up more funding. But if there's something that you need to physically practice, then by all means, a drill or a full-scale exercise might be right for you. All right, finally, in the beginning stages, you're going to develop a scenario. I would like to point out the fourth step is a lot of people's favorite, develop a scenario. But first, I'd like to ask you if you're ready for this step. You are ready to start thinking about the scenario if you have determined your objectives, all right? You already have a clear set of objectives that you want to achieve. You already determined who your participation is going to, both for your planning team and for the eventual exercise, and you determine the most appropriate exercise type. So if you've done all those things, you are ready to develop a scenario. When you do, lean heavily on your objectives. What did you decide you wanted to exercise? Objectives determine the scenario. I implore you not to let it happen the other way around. People have all sorts of ideas about what would be interesting or fun or challenging, but if it's not getting at the objectives that you set for yourself, or it's overkill and you're going to be doing too much when your objectives are more clear-cut, then you're not doing yourself any service. You might want to think about breaking up objectives and use scenario vignettes, right? You could do one scenario that moves through time, or you could do scenario vignettes if you want to exercise things that kind of either skip through time or skip through topics. You always want to keep the scenario as simple as possible while still achieving your objectives. So if you need a full scenario to do that, do that. If a scenario vignette gets you there, use that instead. Work in lockstep with your planning team. The people on your planning team are your subject matter experts in the things that you're going to be exercising. They'll help you develop and, most importantly, validate your scenario. Work within the boundaries of how much time and funding you have. These, unfortunately, are limiting. If you have a small budget and not a lot of time, choose one or two objectives and think about having a simple scenario that gets you to achieve your objectives. If you have more time and funding, you can choose more objectives to do, and you can have kind of a bigger scenario with more people involved. But we do need to all face the realities of time and funding, as everybody that is listening to this knows. Okay, number 5. Now we're going to plan for conduct and evaluation. So first, conduct. Determine when and how long the exercise will be. How will you do that? You will look at your objectives. If you need to cover many different topics, you need, maybe a half day or maybe even a full day. If you're just doing a quick drill and people need hands-on experience and you're going to cycle through, maybe it's a couple hours. And then when? How long before your elections do you want to hold your exercise? If it's something where you're reminding people of a skill, like a hands-on thing, maybe it's just a little bit before the exercise. But if you need to rewrite a plan based on the outcomes of the exercise, then you need to give yourself enough time to do that and then socialize that new plan. You also want to determine what, if any, services or access will be limited during that time. Are you going to close down a school, for example? Are you going to close down a municipal building? Are certain responders not going to be available? So make sure that's part of your conduct planning so you can let the public know, and also call in any backfill that you might need. Third is to consider pre-exercise public notification. Are people going to see, fire trucks where they don't normally see them? Are they going to hear sirens go off? Are they going to see police activity? Those are the kinds of things that if you are doing that sort of full-size exercise, you do want to tell your public that this is happening so there's no cause for concern. Also, I think they'll be proud and relieved to know that their jurisdiction is preparing for their elections. And finally, consider the use and makeup of breakout groups. Are you going to all stay in one location, or are you going to be in different locations? Are you going to stay all in one room, or are you going to split up into other rooms? This really affects your staffing and such as note takers, which we'll talk about in the evaluation. So, evaluation, planning for evaluation. So, plan for non-attributional note takers for each breakout area or physical location. So, if you've decided you need to exercise in 3 locations simultaneously, depending on how big they are, you need 1 or 2 note takers at each of those locations. Next, you want to develop an exercise evaluation guide. There are examples online. FEMA's toolkit has many examples of exercise evaluation guides, but you can also develop your own. The guide is for the note takers and the eventual report writers to use to know what they should be looking for. So your subject matter experts know how things should go, and that's what should go into an exercise evaluation guide for your evaluators to check and see if it happened. You want to find a report template that meets your needs. Again, you can use the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, or HCEP template, for an after-action report or for a quick look report. But depending on what you're going to do with the results, a different kind of report might suit your needs. So think about that ahead of time, because that's what your note takers and your evaluators are going to be aiming towards, and it's good that they can know it ahead of time. Finally, you want to make sure that you invite a neutral person to run a hot wash. At the end of the exercise, it's really helpful if somebody not involved in the exercise directly runs that hot wash, so people feel more comfortable stating their opinions about how things went, the things that challenged them, and the things that they did really well at. Number 6, now we're at conduct, the day you've been waiting for. So you're going to conduct the exercise and the evaluation. So provide a read ahead for participants. You want to share highlights of the scenario for workshops, and you want to explain anything technical that will be discussed during the exercise. This isn't a test, it's an exercise. You want people to be able to do what they need to do so that you can work towards continual improvement. If everyone gets hung up on one technical issue and needs to stop and learn that real time, that's going to be a distraction. So just let them know that sort of information ahead of time. Have members of the planning team available to float between groups or sites if possible. As I said, your planning team are your subject matter experts. So if you, for example, had somebody from EMS be on your planning team, have them located where your ambulances are staged. They're in the best position to know what people are doing and if they're doing what they're supposed to be, and can answer questions about the exercise as a whole. Have enough note takers. As I said, you can make sure that you have them at the physical sites or breakout groups. Just you always need those listening ears in. If things are going to be extremely fast-paced in a certain location, you'll probably want more than one note taker. So the number of note takers, you guessed it, dependent on your objectives. If you have multiple objectives that you're trying to look at one time, you might need more than one evaluator in that area, the note taker. Leave enough time for the hot wash. So people get tired during exercises, even the short ones. but make sure that you schedule the time and maybe a little refreshments before the hot wash. It's a great time to document those quick wins as far as the challenges and the strengths that were observed, and to discuss kind of what to do with those results. And lastly, integrate those results. So as part of your objectives, you will already thought about the product of the exercise, right? It really should guide it. But some examples for you include you might be writing an election security annex to your emergency operation plan or your continuity of operations plan. You might be trying to include a communications plan in those that's more specific to election security. You might want to develop some checklists or tools for incident response. Some of these include decision trees for anticipated decisions, pre-scripted crisis communications messages, so those could be internal or external or both. Laminated response cards is something you might be aiming for with your exercise. You might be integrating the results to develop a resource library of critical documents and plans. And not only should these be somewhere accessible electronically, but in case your incident is a cybersecurity incident, also having printed out copies of those critical documents might prove to be incredibly important. You might want to use the results to identify gaps and then use those in grant and federal funding requests. Everyone needs to write those investment justifications at one time or another, or a grant proposal. And integrating the results from an exercise that you've done is a great way to demonstrate what you need. So some last things to consider before I provide you some final contact information. First of all, what objectives are most relevant to your jurisdiction? And importantly, have they changed over the last few years? We live in a dynamic environment, post-COVID. As I noted, that there's some cleavages within our society. Is anything different about how you expect your elections to go in your jurisdiction? And if so, what are the objectives that will get you to those changes? The next one is, can you exercise election security as part of another emergency management threat or hazard? Like more bang for your buck if you can do like cyber, which you also need to do for your federal grant money. Can you do a cybersecurity incident as part of election security? Or do you need to every year do a winter storm exercise? And can you do it that it lands in November? This is a great idea if you have solid plans that people know and you can kind of two birds with one stone. But if it causes you unnecessary complexity, just exercise one thing at a time. Finally, do you want to consider an election security series so that you only exercise 1, 2, or 3 objectives with smaller groups of people when possible? So this could be you just want to exercise the way that traffic is going to flow into a municipal building on the day of elections. Well, you don't need your vendors there, for example, on that sort of thing. You can have a smaller group and just get 1 or 2 objectives related to transportation done. Other things that you can do as a kind of discussion-based exercise be virtual for convenience, right? So maybe some of those things have to be in person, like exercising your traffic flow, but maybe some discussion-based objectives can be done virtually, and you can split those off to only have the people in the room that you need. Another idea is, can you record different pieces of that security series so that anybody who wasn't a part of it could still see it? Maybe they have a very, very small role, maybe they couldn't attend, but when you do a series and you do kind of smaller bits, that makes them very easy to record and to show to people, especially if they're virtual. All right, so contact information. Dawn Thomas, my email is right here. Electionsecurity@cna.org will get you to our general election security inbox. www.cna.org gets you to our website, and the QR code gets you to an election security landing page where there's the kind of information I covered today, plus other pieces of information that might support you. I want to close by saying I have full confidence that jurisdictions are capable of doing their own exercises Everybody is busy and everybody has more on their plates than they can handle. But with some good planning and some dedication of your planning team and following these simple 7 steps, I have full confidence that you will run a successful and helpful election security exercise. Thank you for joining us. If you are interested in learning more or taking part in one of our election security tabletop exercises, follow the QR code to our election security page and contact us at electionsecurity@cna.org.